Hello everyone, and welcome to a remote sensing lecture video. And in this video, we're going to talk about one of the most fundamental concepts in remote sensing, and that's the idea of the remote sensing data structure. So the remote sensing data structure. Data structure. And at the most fundamental level of the remote sensing data structure, it's something hopefully we're all familiar with if we've ever dealt with any sort of camera or a cell phone camera, digital camera, even computer monitors, right? They all have the same fundamental building block, and it's this small square that we call the pixel. Right, the pixel. And you're going to hear us talk about pixel over and over and over and over and over again in this course. And when we're talking about pixel, this is the fundamental building block of remote sensing. Everything we do in remote sensing, in some way, shape, or form, boils down to a pixel or more pixels. Right? So inside of the pixel, I'm going to do this in a different color. Inside of the pixel, we have the value. The value. This is the number, right? The number in the pixel. All right. It's the number in the pixel. And if you've ever done anything with digital photography, you may be familiar with RGB, right? Red, green, and blue. Right, those are values, and those values are in the pixel. Right? So again, value is just the number inside of the pixel, and the pixel is just this smallest unit in remote sensing. It's just that little tiny square that stores the data. So we can start to build upon this idea of pixels, and we can do that by putting pixels together. And the first way we can put pixels together is we can put pixels together in a row. Right. So here we have 4 pixels. Right. And this is a row. And a row is just a horizontal group of pixels. A horizontal group of pixels. That's the first way that we can organize pixels together. The second way that we can organize pixels together is in what's called a column. Right? So if we go down like this, right? This right here, right? This is called a column. And this is a vertical group of pixels. All right, so we have a column which is vertical, so that's pixels going down. And we have rows, which is horizontal, which are pixels going from left to right. And so you can imagine that we have multiple rows and multiple columns. And we can have something like this. Right, where now we have 4 rows and 4 columns, right? This whole thing here this is what's called a band. So a band is all the rows and columns. All the rows and columns. Okay, so just to quickly reiterate, right, we have this small individual building block here of the pixel. If we go across horizontally, we have a row. If we go down vertically, we have a column. And if we look at all the rows and columns together, we have what's called a band. Now, what makes remote sensing so useful, and we're going to talk a lot more about this later in other videos, is the idea that we can have multiple bands. So let's just really quickly sketch out what that might look like. Okay, right? So we're going to have 1, 2. Right? So here's a 3-column, 3-row band. And then we'll have another and then just for good measure, we'll have a 3rd. And so each one of these has 3 rows and 3 columns, and this image also has 3 bands, 1, 2, and 3. So we have band 1, band 2, and band 3. Right. So bands, so these are multiple bands. Right, multiple bands. So this whole thing here, let me do that in a different color. Right, this whole thing here, let's do this in green. Right, this whole thing here. Right, this is the image. Right, so we started off with a pixel. Inside of that pixel, we had the value, which is the number that's stored in the pixel. We can group pixels into horizontal groups of rows and vertical groups of columns. If we look at all the rows and columns, we get what's called a band. And because we're dealing with remote sensing, we can have multiple bands. And if you group everything together, that's what we call the image. So this is one good way of thinking about this. And I want to take a second. I want to make sure this sinks in. The idea that we sort of built upon this basic building block of the pixel into rows and columns, into bands, and then building the bands together into the image. So what I want to do is I want to take another way of looking at that. I'm going to do this in, go back to white. And I just want to do this, look at it slightly differently. Right. So we're going to have the same 3 by 3 band, right? So this is the same thing. So we'll, just to sort of foreshadow a little bit about why bands are important, we're going to use blue. I'm going to call this band 1. Right, band 1. We're going to do a second band here. Right, so same 3 by 3 thing. We're going to have this one be green. And this is going to be band 2. And then finally, to keep with the theme, let's do a third band here. Now, there's nothing special about 3s here, right? You could have thousands of rows and columns, and you could have 10, 20, 100 bands, right? This is just to explain the concept. All right, so we have 3 bands again. Just to sort of finish up here, we're going to have this one be in red. Band 3. So just to sort of recap what we've done, right? We have our 3 bands, 1, 2, and 3. So this image has 9 rows, 9 columns, or sorry, 3 rows and 3 columns and 3 bands. So what I want to do this is talk about it in a slightly different perspective, and this will probably match more so if you've done anything in computer science or mathematics. And I want to talk about how we get the values, right? I call this indexing, how we index the values, right? And so there's 3 things at play here. We have the rows, right? So this is row 1. Sorry, let me switch to a different. Let's do yellow. So let's erase that. Shoot. Let's rebuild that for a second. Sorry about that. Okay, switch to yellow for this. So we have row 1, row 2, and row 3. Right? And then we have, I'm going to use COL for column. Column 1, column 2, and column 3. Right, so all I've done is explicitly label the rows and the columns. And it's important to realize that we're always starting in the upper left-hand corner here. So this would be the first. This pixel would be row 1, column 1, band 1. And what I wanted to explain to you how we can get individual pixels out. And so let's just say that we were interested in this pixel right here. Let's put a star in it. Oop. Put a star in it. Let's just say we're interested in that pixel right there. Right? So we need to look and say, okay, well, we're in band 3. We're in row 2, and we're in column 1. So let's go through and figure out how we would actually do that. So you're going to start, whenever we try to figure out where things are, it always goes row, column, band. Right? Indexing, pixels. Right, row, column, band. So if we wanted to get to this pixel right here, right, we look at the row, well, it's in the second row. Look at the column, it's in the first column. Then we look at the band and we say it's in the third band. Right? So hopefully that makes sense, right? When we're indexing pixels, we're trying to figure out where a pixel is in the image, right? We look at the row, then we look at the column, and then we look at the band. So a good way to think of this is the rows are your Ys, the columns are your X's, and the bands are your Z. Right, so this is just like indexing a three-dimensional matrix, right? Because an image is just a three-dimensional matrix. So you have X's, Y's, and Z's. And we're trying to index a pixel, we're just giving them. We're giving the Y, the X, and the Z. So hopefully that made sense. And again, this is just a different way of conceptualizing the same idea up here of the remote sensing data structure with columns, rows, and bands. So hopefully that made sense. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.